Hello, YouTubers. Joe Kersey here on Monday, November 11th, 2013 at 1:45 in the afternoon on Veterans Day. Which really was, when I was growing up, still was called Armistice Day. And that was when there were still a number of, well, a lot actually, although they were getting quite old, of World War I veterans around. And in school, we did the minute or minute or two of silence at 11 o'clock in the morning on November 11th. When we were in school, interestingly, we didn't get that day off, but we observed it. Actually, occasionally, later on when I was in high school, we still did a parade on that day, but by that time it had been a day when, you got off school. But there'd still be observances, and the high school band would march and so forth. And but in elementary school, I remember, you stood up, and teachers made you try to shut up. And but a lot of people, my age, although we were getting right toward the end of it. I'm 61, and so this would have been in the early 60s. So that means that the war was about 45 years out. So if a grandparent had been in the war, you heard about it from your granddad. I don't think too many women were involved in the United States effort then. And of course, there was always the whole thing about the 1918 flu, which, was very omnipresent in the memory of a lot of people who would be my grandparents' generation. My grandfather died in the 1918 flu epidemic. But you did this, and we called it Armistice Day because it was still very much tied to World War I, and of course now it's not. Now it's not, and rightfully so. It's called Veterans Day, and it's expanded to include, and of course Memorial Day, as you know from those of you who've watched my True Memorial Day video. No, well, anyway, that Memorial Day is for the people who died in the war, any war. But the Veterans Day is for all people who have served, even the guy behind the typewriter, or even the guy behind the computer screen nowadays, I guess. Even the guy, well, whatever some of the non-combat specialties do now, and I'm sure there's a number of them. But a veteran is anybody who served in the military. And I ran across something today on the internet, and I wish I had saved the reference, but I didn't, which is sort of a criminal act in anybody who has pretensions to be an academic, which I don't anymore. still, I like to be intellectually honest. And it says, what is a veteran? I'm going to show that. I'm going to put this up on the screen here briefly, so that y'all can get a look at it. Maybe you can take a screenshot of it if you want to save it. But I'll read it to you anyway. What is a veteran? A veteran, whether active duty, discharged, retired, or reserved, is someone who at one point in his life, well, I guess we say her life, his or her life, wrote a blank check made payable to the United States of America for an amount of up to and including his life or her life. That is honor. There are way too many people in this country today who no longer understand that fact. And that's just the honest truth. You know, I wanted to do a Veterans Day piece ever since I did the Memorial Day piece. And I got thinking about this. Well, first of all, it's very interesting. For the longest time, and even today, I'm sure, guys who actually, were involved in wars, they don't talk about it very much. If they talk about it at all, they talk about the selected people. And the 4 or 5 or 6 times that people have talked to me about it, I felt very privileged to hear their accounts of it. Because there are so many people that you run into and this guy was in such and such. He was in Vietnam, or nowadays he was in Iraq, or he was in Afghanistan. Of course, when we were growing up, we knew the guys that had been in World War II, but we also knew these guys didn't say anything about it. They just said nothing about it. And the very few of us that knew somebody who had grown up and knew people who were in the First World War, you rarely heard, you didn't hear anything about that at all. You're going to excuse me a minute here, guys. So I got thinking back about the veterans I'd known. It turns out there's a number of them. And I'll sort of wax on here a while, I think, now. The first one was a fellow named, I'm sure he wouldn't mind you telling me his name. His name is Harley Druho. Now, Mr. Druho was the superintendent of schools that hired my dad for his first and only job in Lebanon, Ohio, after my dad finished vocational agriculture training at Ohio State in 1932. And over the years, when my dad bought the place out where we lived and I grew up, he bought it in 1936. And he and Mr. Druho started gardening out there. They put in like about 5 acres of garden each year. And when Mr. Druho would often show up early in the morning, and they'd garden until about 10:30 or 11, and then it's like time to sit out under the maple trees there in the side yard for a while, and it was just about, this was before daylight savings time, by the way. So that when the sun actually came up over the tops of the tall maple trees there under which they were sitting, my dad would say to Mr. Drew, "Harley, crack a brew, Harley." So very often, at 10:30 in the morning, if I have a beer, I'll say, "Crack a brew, Harley." So here I was about 7, 8, 9, and I'd go out there and I'd sit with them on the ground, and they'd start telling each other's story. And very, very occasionally, Mr. Drew would talk about his time in the First World War. And it turns out that, see, Mr. Drew came from a French-speaking family. I mean, his family was from France. Now, he was born in the United States. He was a U.S. citizen, but his family came over from France. And his grandmother, excuse me, who at the time he went to the First World War, or shortly there before, well, maybe not, but certainly she was alive up into the late 1890s. She would tell the young Harley Druho about her grandmother. So, grandmother to the fellow I'm talking about, who would be like a great-grandfather, to me, or a grandfather to me in different, stages of life. So, two generations. But he would talk about how his grandmother told him when he was 5 or 6 or 7, how she, at the age of 5 or 6 or 7, was taken by her grandmother to the Place de la Concorde in Paris to watch the beheadings during the Reign of Terror in 1793. Talk about a direct connection to history. And then another direct connection to history, then Mr. Drew went on to talk about when he was in the United States Army in the First World War, that because of his, fluent French-speaking skills, the fact the man wasn't astute, he was noticed by someone who mattered and eventually ended up on the staff of John J. Pershing, who was commander of U.S. forces, the American Expeditionary Forces in France, when, America got involved in World War I, which was one of the more stupid things we did. But in any case, he was on Pershing's staff, and he would talk about, Pershing's office at that time was, well, at least at one time, was across the street from Notre Dame Cathedral. And he would talk about life in Paris, very much behind the lines. But he was translating. He would translate. Plus he was he liaised with the French staffs because he spoke fluent French. And so he met all these guys. He met Foch, and he met Pétain, and he met MacArthur, and he met the American. He met George Marshall. He met all these guys. And he would talk about that. And, of course, it was too bad I was too young to fully really appreciate, this historical raw information that was being tossed out at my feet. I mean, literally at my feet. When I was sitting there listening to these guys talk, well, they all had a couple, 3 brews there to beat the heat of the day before they would start in again in the late afternoon. With this garden stuff. So that was, he obviously they went out. They went out, and he saw some of this horrible crap out there. After the battles in World War I. So that was the first experience of me hearing a veteran actually talk about war, although this wasn't about combat per se. But I might develop this idea here a little farther on in another video here, but I think I've gone on enough for today. I will say that it's a good thing that people still will do this. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. You know, I mean, what I'm very terrified of is that the people that are still here, who run this place, who run this country, are going to forget the importance of this and just fritter it away. So I'm going to leave you all with this again. Again, I didn't write this. Well, God bless all the people who did. Bye-bye, YouTubers.